Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to a new video podcast from ITSS Verona, provided by you this time from the Italy team. And today we'll discuss democracy and politics of emotion with Dr. Marianna Griffini. Thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Dr. Marianna Griffini joined the Department of European and International Studies at King's College London as a lecturer in 2020 after having worked there as a temporary lecturer in the Department of Political Economy. She has taught widely on topics related to democracy, post-colonialism, populism, immigration, and international political economy. And her PhD research investigated the relationship between the populist radical rights, anti-immigrant sentiment, and colonial memory. So without further ado, I would dive now into the first question. So how should we define democracy nowadays, and how does it connect to the politics of emotions?
Yeah, thank you very much also for the kind introduction. So yes, let's start with the definition of democracy. So first of all, to give a unified definition of democracy, a monolithic definition of democracy is a quite hard task. I've been teaching a whole module on democracy, and we have been looking at lived democracy. So basically, through the notion of lived democracy, you can capture different forms of democracy without engaging them, encapsulating them into one fixed, rigid form. But we have all to start with some basics. So if we go to Dunn, for instance, the author, we can see that democracy is defined as a label for a political regime, as an idea about power can be authorized, and as a moral claim based on the allegiance of individuals. But again, also Dunn remarks the fact that it is a very much contested concept and there's no consensual definition about that. So if we want to allow us to have a more expansive definition of democracy, we can look, for instance, at Cook and al., where they define democracy as a way of life, a form of human society. And this expansive definition affords the most accurate purchase on the multiple ways in which the people can experience and understand democracy in a relational way, in an interactive way, grounded in social dynamics. However, I do understand that also this definition is very much expansive, and if we define democracy just as a way of life, then basically everything can fall under the category of democracy. So let's see a possible other definition of democracy, which is basically, it is not very expansive, but not even very much rigid or focused just on some elements. So democracy, also etymologically, is basically the government in the name of the people, right? So it is seen as basically the promise that the people who are governing are actually making to satisfy the needs of the people. So that's why government in the name of the people. It can be also seen as government for the people, where they cater for their needs, or government by the people, when it is actually the people that take on government, right? So we have anyway to be quite aware also in this case that democracy is very much historically and geographically contingent. So there are different manifestations of democracy or of democratic life, even in formally non-democratic states, and in formally democratic states there may be some instances of undemocratic life. If we again at the end of this quite broad answer, if we want to pin down some elements that we have to look at in order to see the manifestation of this government in the name of the people, or government for the people, government by the people. We can look at elections. They need to be regular, right? Free and fair. We can look at individual rights and liberties. So for instance, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of thought, and freedom of the media, right? And also a system of checks and balances. So these are the main elements of democracy if we really need to, to pin down some elements of democracy to give us a sort of a benchmark against which to assess different countries. But again, as I was saying, even in the case of elections, we in my module, we looked at different kinds of states, so democratic and undemocratic states, and the way in which elections were conducted. And in some states that are considered not the most democratic, elections are seen as a very democratic ritual, as a sort of the essence of democratic life. So, even in the case, and we know that in some otherwise democratic states, there have been some rigged elections. So even pinning down democracy to 3-4 elements can be quite misleading, as I made, made it clear with the example of elections. Even the elements of democracy can be perceived in different ways, contingent, upon the social, historical, geographic context. So we have to be careful if we see that there are elections that are conducted in a state that seem to be free and fair, then it may be that we can see an instance of democratic life in a state that has been characterized as undemocratic otherwise, or that is fairly not very good regarding freedom of the media, for instance, or regarding the rule of law, or regarding checks and balances. And on the other hand, if we see that a state is seen as the peak of democracy in the world, at the same time, we can actually notice some instances in which elections have not been conducted very freely and fairly. Thank you. I think that, it took me quite a long time to give you a short answer.
Yeah, thanks so much for that answer, that insightful response. So then how can we think about politics of emotion in relation to democracy, and why is it important to really consider and understand politics of emotion?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So emotions have been usually considered as belonging to a different sphere, right? To a separate sphere compared to democracy. However, actually, if we look at some authors, for instance, Chantal Mouffe or Jacques Rancière, so they belong to the traditional political philosophy, we can actually notice the importance of emotions in democracy. In my previous attempt to give a definition or more definitions of democracy, I didn't mention emotions, right? So usually it is not something that is mentioned when you talk about democracy. If we actually adopt a more expansive and fluid and dynamic relational definition of democracy, then we can also take emotions into account. It seems that according to the mainstream accounts of democracy, democracy may be antithetical to emotions. So democracy is characterized by, a fixed list of elements. However, after exploring, the multifaceted nature of democracy, we can actually notice that emotions are part and parcel of democracy. So already, if we add a further element to democracy, which I haven't mentioned before, which is the public sphere. So the public sphere is constituted by ideally free citizens, right? And it is inclusive, accessible. So basically, identity doesn't preclude your belonging to the public sphere, and any marker of identity, be it class, ethnicity, gender, religion, nationality, is not actually barring you entry into the public sphere. So the public sphere has this definition. It is basically, like citizens belonging to, taking part in political life, but not belonging to the official, the formal echelons of political life. So they are not, they don't work in the government, or they are not members of a political party in particular. So within the public sphere, we can witness really the potency of emotions. So if we think about the public sphere, and also nowadays all the demonstrations, right, that have been occurring on a regular basis against or in favor of many different issues. So the environment, COVID restrictions. So we can think of many different issues that actually mobilize the passions, right, the emotions of citizens. So also, this notion of the public sphere kind of brings us closer to emotions. And the public sphere is part of democracy, because it is there where people actually can voice their political views, can express their will, and then through representation, the government is supposed to give voice, right, to the people to satisfy their demands for change and all what I've said before. And the public sphere is actually based on individual rights and liberties, right? Because the individual is free to assemble, right? To get together now, sometimes even virtually, if you cannot do it in person. And the individual has freedom to voice their own concerns, and irrespective of, again, identity markers. I do understand that this is a very ideal definition. That's why I started to give a definition of the public sphere, saying ideally this is. But I think this is important because it does connect to democracy, right? Because usually democracy has an active public sphere, and it brings us closer, one step closer to the role of emotions, because I've basically given you an experiential example of the role of emotions in democracy by mentioning protests, right, demonstrations. So for instance, I was saying that this has been theorized by some authors such as Chantal Mouffe that I was mentioning earlier. So Chantal Mouffe said it was quite skeptical of representative democracy, but we are not going into these political theory details. Anyway, she was arguing that aggregative democracy, which is basically the aggregation of citizens' preferences, and this is manifested, expressed, embodied by representative democracy. So may end up into something quite dry, as it may leave aside passions, right, and affects, and it may see individuals as very rational, utility maximizing subjects, abstracting them from social and power relationships. So this is this sort of skeptical and a little bit pessimistic view that Mouffe has of representative democracy, while she thinks that the full potential inherent to democracy can thrive and can fully express itself through agonistic politics. So agonistic politics is a form of democracy where you do engage in a healthy debate with your own adversaries, because of course in the political arena you cannot really reach consensus and unanimity every time, and that is not even healthy, right, for politics, for bringing about change. But agonism is not really a fight, is not a struggle, is a healthy confrontation between different individuals, because, you know, it departs from the assumption that, you know, perfect harmony is not really possible. There are different relations of power within the democratic arena, and these different relations of power, these differences between the protagonists of the democratic arena can manifest themselves through the use of emotions, of passions in an agonistic way. So the agonism, just a brief etymological clarification. Agonism is basically the debate between two adversaries. So us and versus them, right? But this is different from antagonism. Antagonism is the struggle, the fight between different enemies. So it is when the us versus them turns into a sort of a more extreme, basically us versus the illegitimate them. So I hope that this is quite clear, even if I move between different disciplines. So just in a nutshell, to conclude, if we adopt a more expansive definition of democracy, and if we adopt Mouffe's notion of democracy as agonism, we can understand the role of emotions, that emotions play in democracy. So conflict cannot be eradicated. We cannot achieve unanimity, and we have to respect each other's views, right? And this is the very essence of democracy, and this is the very essence of a prosperous and thriving public sphere where individuals can participate, not really individuals, it's better to say, kind of democratic subjects and agents, so we can empower citizens, can participate, into the democratic workings of political life.
Thank you very much, Marianna. This is so enriching. It's so interesting to hear. So how do you think we can compare and contrast the role of politics of emotions across different period of times and countries then?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'll give a brief overview, as it is quite a daunting task to give a comprehensive overview. So we can start with something quite light and which is actually the use of parody, so laughter as a sort of emotion. And we noticed this, for instance, in Iceland, where the best party, so the mayor of Reykjavik in Iceland, belonged to the best party, the so-called best party, and so the name of the party in itself was quite self-explanatory. And the mayor of Reykjavik, John Nahr, was an actor himself, and he used this parody that was called Stiob as a sort of anti-politics. So we can see that in this case, agonism plays out in the form, unfolds in the form of satire, of making fun of those who are occupying predominant positions in political life. And actually, this reminded me of the fact that also in Italy we had, right, Grillo, that was an actor in himself, and he did start the movement, the 5-star movement, that then turned into a party and ran for office. So I think that this is quite interesting. So again, the use of emotions, of satire, parody, laughter as a form of criticism of the current democratic state, right? But that is aiming at subverting it and in bringing about a more genuine form of democracy, according to them. Of course, I'm not taking parts. And something similar has been noticed also in Lithuania. And I have, I'm sorry that I cannot, show you the slides with the posters, but there are very interesting posters where in Lithuania, the Pirate Party was using a sort of carnivalesque politics in their own political campaign, using in posters the images of prostitutes, of pirates on a ship that was sinking, and various different forms of satire. In this way, they were trying to promote moral citizenship and political opposition through laughter. And again, this was oriented towards a new way of politics that was basically reframed in a less formal way. So this is satire, laughter, still on, on the positive side of emotions. We have seen a lot of hope, especially now during the pandemic, right? Many politicians expressing hope or encouragement around the world. And if we focus on the use of the hearts, so the emojis, the hearts in Twitter and Facebook messages in Italy, I looked for, the use of these hearts in various politicians' accounts, Twitter and Facebook accounts. So Salvini does use many hearts. So the emphasis on hearts is also, sorry, not just hearts, on emotions and emojis in particular is indicative of populism intended in a neutral way as trying to represent the will of the people in an emotional and direct way. So this can be, noticed in the left wing, in the right wing. It can be also post-ideological populism. So they try to capture basically the hearts and minds of the people, right? Try to, for instance, last year, around this time of the year, Salvini's accounts were dotted with hearts, wishing, a Merry Christmas, wishing a Happy New Year, hoping that, the pandemic would be solved, even if, unfortunately, we are still in a quite unpleasant situation. So basically, this the use of hearts, hope, is meant to, of course, to be a form of encouragement for the citizens. It is meant also to target the broadest part of the population. So from teenagers to the elderly that anyway have access to social media, but also in terms of different classes, right? It basically is a way also to attract, for instance, elderly women, at home. So they can be, moved by the use of emojis or the use of kittens that Salvini has often posted on social media. So we have this form of affective politics, the politics of affect and emotions. So hearts have been used also somewhere very far away from Italy, which is in Kargil. So basically, between India and Pakistan, there has been a brewing conflict in the border zone. So they reached a ceasefire in 2003, and the government has adopted a politics of promoting reconciliation, right? Through what has been called a hard warfare. So it is not, of course, a violent form of warfare, but it is a form of warfare that tries, again, to win, right, the hearts of the population that has been hurt and alienated by conflict. So they did this by building, schools, medical camps, educational facilities, by emphasizing compassion assistance. So even compassion, empathy are emotions that are part of democracy. And again, with the pandemic, we see again the prominence of these emotions. For instance, the use of the emoji that became new during the pandemic, I think, on Facebook, the care emoji, right? The emoji that is hugging, right, a small heart, if I'm not mistaken. So this is indicative also, I think, of the fact that emotions are important also among the population. So not just democratic life at the top, so parties in office or parties on the ground, but also it is important within what we would call the public sphere. And if we move, on the spectrum of emotions, we can move more to the negative side. So we may encounter apathy. So I've been discussing a lot with my students whether apathy is an emotion or not, because etymologically, apathy is the absence of pathos, which is emotion in ancient Greek. But in the literature, even apathy has been described as an emotion very much prominent in democracy when people are dissatisfied and disenchanted with democratic life. So it has been observed, for instance, in Serbia after the conflict, where people have been, so their hopes about substantial change and democratization have been crushed, or at least they felt that these hopes had been crushed, and they basically withdrew from political life and just kind of created this form of apathy whereby they were not expressing anymore their interest in politics and their engagement in politics. And we can hear so many times about citizens' disengagement nowadays, especially among the youth. And I think that apathy connects quite well with disengagement, because it can be, a step forward. So first citizens disengage, and then this may turn into apathy. Or on the other side, deep disenchantment can also produce another emotion, which is quite interesting, and it is political exhaustion. It has been observed among protesters in Occupy Madrid. So the Occupy movement, there was also Occupy Wall Street, for instance. It was a movement against, sprang out of the global financial crisis. So it was a movement against neoliberalism mainly, and representative politics as it was at that time. So they wanted to bring about a form of deliberative politics, deliberative democracy, where citizens actually had a say and engaged. So these meetings in Madrid took part on the streets, and they were very much engaging. So they were attracting passersby and involving passersby into their conversations. And at the end of the day, what they described was an emotion of exhaustion, because they felt really drained and tired after having tried so much to engage in politics, departing from an emotion of profound disenchantment with political life. And finally, just to keep this not too long, we can look at the emotion of fear, which is possibly the one we are most familiar with now. And, with the pandemic again, so we may have hope, but many times we may have fear as well. And also the politics of fear has been observed regarding migration, regarding terrorism. So the politics of fear is widespread. There are countless of examples about the politics of fear, and sometimes fear is also induced, or some political parties may exploit the fear of the population in order to then present themselves as the saviors of the people. So they need to step in because they see a crisis, so they need to step in. And yeah, with this probably it's best if I conclude this round of emotions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Griffini. It was obviously relates to the public sphere and politics of emotion, and your analysis on some of the ways that manifests in different countries has been really insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianna Griffini, and we were very happy to have you here. And I think we can conclude our appointment of today here. But it's been really insightful, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for your invitation. It has been very nice for me to to talk to you about this academic and more also experiential stuff, drawing on today's events. And yeah, thank you again, and let's hope that there will be some hope in politics as well.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.